Hello, this is part 8 of our comparative Bible study series where Jesus has just attended the Passover before John the Baptist was put in prison. During this Bible study, I would like to finish the discussion we began last time where we were wrapping up Jesus being visited by Nicodemus and Jesus and John the Baptist preaching at the same time. Overall, this is our 33rd New Testament Bible study. This is where we left off at the end of the last Bible study, where we were comparing and contrasting two different historical events. Both these events included questions being raised by John the Baptist's disciples, and both included an analogy in the answer revolving around a bridegroom. However, both were different with respect to time, place, subject matter, the person being asked the question, and nuances in the answer received. In our current Bible study, the question had to do with purification and was asked directly to John the Baptist before John the Baptist was put in prison. The other event recorded in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke had to do with fasting, and John's disciples asked Jesus during his Galilean ministry after John the Baptist was put in prison. Although both the answers in both events included an analogy of a bridegroom, and the Lord Jesus is the bridegroom in both the analogies and both the answers, they seem to be talking about two different events in time that would occur or would happen in the future. In particular, in the event recorded in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Lord Jesus is telling John's disciples that his disciples rejoice when they are with him or with the bridegroom, but there would be a day in the future where they would fast when the bridegroom is taken from them. For example, as Jesus said in Matthew chapter 9, "Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast." Apparently speaking here in the midst of Jesus' earthly ministry, even forecasting towards the end of his earthly ministry. Whereas in the Gospel of John in our current Bible study, which happens early in time at the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, John the Baptist is preparing his disciples for him being eclipsed and replaced basically by the Lord Jesus, who is the greater one, who is the bridegroom, and John is only the friend of the bridegroom. As a quick aside, I wonder if Jesus used this bridegroom analogy with John's disciples because, of course, Jesus knew all things, and he knew that John had used the analogy before with his disciples, and he adapted it in his explanation to help John's disciples understand what he's saying. Or likely so much more of this was planned from the beginning than we can even imagine. Again, our current Bible study, speaking of the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, him gaining momentum and surpassing John, whereas the other Gospels are recording an event in the middle of Jesus' earthly ministry and even making some comment about the future when he would be taken from them, it appears here. I'd like now to go into more detail about John the Baptist's answer to his disciples in our current Bible study. So John the Baptist's disciples had taken note of Jesus' rising popularity and said to John that all men come to him, meaning they all were coming to the Lord Jesus now. I really love John the Baptist's humble response here. A man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. Not only humble, but very, very true. John also reminds his disciples of things he said in the past, forecasting this. For example, he told them, "Ye yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him." As you recall in John chapter 1, before he baptized Jesus, it's noted, "And he confessed, and denied not, but confessed, I am not the Christ." Also, John had consistently told them that someone greater would be coming and replacing him. "He must increase, but I must decrease." As you recall, the Gospel of John, at least 3 times before, notes something similar to this, that someone coming after him would be preferred before him. So here John has been very humble, clear, and consistent the whole time. So let's move forward to John chapter 3, verse 31. It appears these next few verses in John's discourse with his disciples, he explains or prophesies who Jesus is and his significance. Just as Jesus and John used the same analogy of a bridegroom when answering John's disciples, I can't help but to notice here how there are similarities in John's response to his disciples as in Jesus talking to Nicodemus. I'd like next to compare some of these similarities beginning with verse 31. There we read, "He that cometh from above is above all. He that is of the earth is earthly, and speaketh of the earth. He that cometh from heaven is above all." Note that how when Jesus talked to Nicodemus, John similarly speaks of things in heaven or things above, and how the Lord Jesus Christ would be above all. Or at least both make mention that the Lord Jesus is from heaven or is in heaven. And both the Lord Jesus and John the Baptist both contrasted these things in heaven with earthly things or things of the earth. Granted, there are differences in what John the Baptist and Jesus are saying in these two passages, but I thought these similarities were at least noteworthy. Okay, moving along to verse 32. I think there we'll see more of a direct correlation. There we read, "And what he hath seen and heard, that he testifieth, and no man receiveth his testimony." Likewise, when the Lord Jesus spoke with Nicodemus, both Jesus and John stressed the fact that Jesus testifies of things that he has heard or things that he has had a first-hand account of. Likewise, both John and Jesus emphasize that people do not receive the testimony or witness of the Lord Jesus. As a side note, both the word witness and testimony here are from the same underlying Greek word. In contrast to those not receiving the witness or testimony of the Lord Jesus, we read beginning with verse 33, "He that hath received his testimony hath set his seal that God is true. For he whom God hath sent speaketh the words of God." Notice here a correlation between truth and God. God is true. Likewise, when talking to Nicodemus, Jesus commented that those who do truth, their deeds are wrought in God. I may be paraphrasing too much there. Let's move on to the middle of verse 34 in John chapter 3. "For God giveth not the Spirit by measure unto him." Notice here the reference to Spirit. As we spoke in New Testament Bible Study 31, Jesus made a lot of references to the Spirit when speaking to Nicodemus. This phrase, "giveth not the Spirit by measure," appears to be indicating without limit. Let's move on to the last two verses of chapter 3. "The Father loveth the Son, and hath given all things into his hand. He that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him." Likewise, when Jesus spoke with Nicodemus, he also, like John, spoke of those who believed on the Son as having everlasting life or not being condemned, and contrasted that with those who do not believe on the Son, who would be condemned. I thought these similarities between some of the things that Jesus told Nicodemus and what John told his disciples is pretty neat. Let's move on to chapter 4. "When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee." Now, in New Testament Bible Study 26, we discussed another reason for why Jesus departed into Galilee, namely that John was cast into prison. Now, why was John the Baptist put in prison? Because he reproved Herod the Tetrarch for having his brother Philip's wife. And where was Herod the Tetrarch? He was Tetrarch of Galilee. Isn't it amazing how Jesus is not departing from the place where John was put into prison, but he's going to the place where John was put into prison? And the Pharisees knew that Jesus or his disciples were baptizing more people than John. I think this is pretty interesting. Let's stop here for now. Lord willing, maybe we'll have another Bible study in the future.